Hi, my name is Mark Roach. This is Mark's Headroom. This is an experimental channel. I'm putting it out there on YouTube, TikTok, just to experiment, get some feedback, find out if there's something here that people find interesting and helpful in their lives. And today I wanted to run through a few thoughts that I had on my mind. Some of the most recent feedback that I had really spawned these ideas this morning. So I'm writing now and reading. I'll read some stuff that I wrote just today. I'll remind you that I'm on the fifth day of a fast. Since back in 2021, about 4 years ago, I started doing 5-day fast and eating 2 days every week for, I guess we're into nearly 4 years now. And it's amazing the kind of insights that you get. Some people think I do it for other reasons than why I really do it. I really do it just because it fascinates me to find out how far I can push myself within healthy limits. So I set the 5 and 2 as a kind of a practical, safe way of experimenting with what happens when you go 5 days without food. And I'll have coffee and some supplements during the week when I'm not eating to keep myself healthy. And I also make a number of measurements of my body to ensure that I'm healthy. And I feel great. And right now I'm on the 5th day, closing down on well, I guess I ate Sunday night at about 8, and right now it's about 2 p.m. or 2:30 on on Friday. So that's 4 days plus, well, 5 hours short of another day. So if you want to, get real precise here, I think 53 hours is my normal eating window. So that's enough about the diet. But I work out at least 10 hours a week in addition to the fasting, and it's pretty heavy. I try to keep myself in decent shape, and of course, I've been doing this a long time, so I don't advocate anyone else doing this. And I'm just throwing this out here. I like to find what comes up in Mark's Headroom here at the end of a 5-day fast and put it out there, kind of challenging myself to be myself in front of the collective. And one of the things that really hit me today was I had some feedback on, like, I'm an actor as well as a petroleum engineer and father. I mean, I could choose a number of different identities that I've committed to in my life and actually performed quite competently at and found a lot of satisfaction in. My challenge has been finding one, like many people, that that would kind of fit the norm of the environment that I was raised in, that most of us are raised in, to pick one profession, to pick one place to live, and just do that for the rest of your life, almost as I saw it, like a robot. So I couldn't do that. And I've always had this strong inner life going. And so someone, commented on one of my Future Wise Energy videos about my demographic and just the idea of someone looking at me and making a judgment about who I am and what I do and where I come from, and even my perspective, which I do have some expertise after 30 years in oil and gas around the world. I'm not identified with it, but I know a lot about it, and that's why I'm sharing it. But for someone to ascribe an identity to me around that, it was a little bit of a shock. And I have to kind of slap myself because I earned it. I was convincing. I am convincing. I am an expert and I know a lot about oil and gas, and I've been all over the world, and I know a lot about the earth and how we bring fossil fuel to market. I'm not an advocate one way or the other. I'm just telling it the way that it is. And I think someone used the word PR, like I was trying to paint a favorable picture for one side or the other. And all I'm doing is basically making observations from an experienced perspective. And that perspective does happen to be based in my experiences that the world, their first priority is survival. And with 8 billion people on the planet, if you're sitting in your bubble in, I don't know, let's just pick Toledo, Ohio, or Austin, Texas, your lifestyle, your choices are all, dictated around some perspective within that bubble. From the global perspective, the world doesn't care about the environment or about a number of things that a lot of us do care about, at least at some level. But the fact is, to say you care about it, to talk about it, to write about it is an entirely different thing than to live it. Because a lot of people, they know that the environment is suffering because of the use of fossil fuel, but they're still driving cars. They're still living the lifestyle. They have no choice, it would seem, because the whole planet is kind of addicted to chasing the maybe the capitalist or American dream. I don't know. I'm just telling you what I see, and I'm not really for it or against it. I'm kind of agnostic in that sense. I grew up in the Ozarks of Missouri. That's, if you're looking at this video from around the world, that's in the middle of America. And it's where a lot of mountain people or hillbillies and Indians, settled. And there is some, civilized and modern, lots of universities and it's beautiful countryside. But it is very naturalistic. So I grew up in a very beautiful place with, great nature. And when I was growing up, we had all 4 seasons. And so that's where I come from. And I ended up, going around the world and meeting people from different cultures and kind of living a rather bizarre life that does give me a perspective that I think is worth sharing, because in our own bubbles, we often characterize people that are not in the bubble as good or bad or as this or that. And what I find is that the bubbles, I mean, they exist for good reasons. But a lot of times inside of those bubbles, people are fighting and aspiring for dominance or control or more of what everybody wants, maybe money or sex or recognition. And those things tend to take priority over a lot of the more, justice and peace and many of those things that I guess maybe as we get older in life, we start to pay more attention to. But the idea that someone identified me with the character or with the role that I was playing, yeah, I'll put that back on myself because that's kind of how I roll. I need to discipline or kind of slap myself and just say, hey, Mark, you put it out there. Someone bought it, hook, line, and sinker. And yeah, I do have white hair. I can show you several characters that I've created in the last 5 to 10 years where I've dyed my hair and I gained 40 pounds, for one role. And then I took it off. And I've gone out, and really done a lot of method type acting where I really did commit to learning a trade or owning some character's most prominent characteristic or maybe their flaw, and going out in public and finding out how people respond to you differently than they do when you look like I do right here. So I'm rambling. That's okay, because this is my channel, and I'm going to do that from time to time. And as I've been told, people that have benefited from some of the things that I've shared, you know, you may ride up in elevators to one floor, get off, and follow me around a little bit, and then the next thing you know, you find yourself on another floor and not really sure why you're there. Well, that's how I've lived my life. And that's why I share a unique perspective, is that I'm not identifying with things the way that most people do. But that doesn't affect my values or my commitments to people or to organizations and promises that I make. Although I can be very nonconformist, and sometimes it can take me to come some time to come around to seeing all of my shadow, so to speak. But some of the thoughts that I wanted to share today are around um, personal perception and values, a philosophical outlook and understanding, areas of interest and exploration, existential questions about responsibility, and then social context and empathy. So let's just start at the top here. Philosophical. Um, says, my approach appeals to you as a way to express a worldview that transcends conventional norms. These are my notes to myself. So what that bullet point is saying, and I used artificial intelligence to assemble this list from a long, kind of rambling set of notes. And it says that the purpose for this channel is to express a worldview that transcends the norms that many people live with in their own bubbles. And I think part of what's behind that is to try to help people understand themselves better, because as I've gone from bubble to bubble, from Cleveland to Los Angeles to Detroit to Austin to Dallas to Houston to Springfield, Missouri, and the Ozarks, I see commonalities between people as human beings, yet, and I also see them making stories up to kind of protect their identity in their own community that are totally unnecessary and actually flawed in many respects. Now, if they help you make a living or raise a family and get by, who am I to say? But what I am doing with transcendent, and some of those people that are in those stages of their life, that may be perfect for that time and that era, or that segment of their life. But there may come a time at some point where people need to figure things out, where they have to deal with the loss of a child or a parent, or the total loss of identity because they're raped, or because there's an injustice that totally makes them feel and wonder about the stories that they've been living, and the truth about that they've accepted or built up about how they're in their operating system, that may or may not actually be truth. And that can be a scary place to be. So my next note says that I've accepted being misunderstood, and it comes with my vibe and perspective. Don't need to say a lot more about that. We all emerge into life with viewpoints inherited from others in other places. Your parents, your environment that you were raised in, do have a strong factor in how you see yourself, and you may be fighting against it, or you may have accepted it. Who am I to say? Through work and self-observation, effort, and attention, you can achieve some degree of self-understanding and maybe independence from really feeling like you're making an autonomous choice, that view is acceptable to you, that you're okay with it, or that you totally dismiss it. You find there's some conflict inside of you, and you look for ways to be authentic with those. And some people may have to bury them for a while before they can find a way to really deal with those, or they may never deal with them, and that may be a confession on their deathbed. And then so it's possible to distinguish between who we are and the perspectives that shaped our early life. And some of us do find that life does organize around ways that align with our purpose. I've known a number of people that were perfectly aligned with the purpose that they felt like they knew in their heart when they were 10, 12, 13 years old. And then I've known people that made the similar choices that 10, 15 years later were really facing what it really felt like to have lived those things out and realized that that wasn't right for them. And in our society, we don't we haven't been all that accepting of people that make those changes. I mean, divorce just became something that was possible probably in the 50s and 60s. And then it became something that was more commonplace in my environment in the 80s and 90s. And I think the statistics still show that, it's about 50-50 whether people make it together to the end of their lives after they get married or whether they divorce. And I'm totally agnostic as to what people do. I think they need to find out what's right for them. And I think life tends to pull people through experiences that ultimately serve their soul. Areas of interest. Well, some of my notes were about Jesus and martyrdom. I was looking at some comedy sketches and I thought, wow, I said this to myself. I was actually feeling really good and like I was really lucky in life. And I said to myself, or something kind of drew this out of me, that I said, maybe I'm like the luckiest man since Jesus. And I thought, well, who considers Jesus to be lucky? And this was a really interesting twist on the idea of Jesus being the Son of God and being the person that, served as a model for much of the Western world, at least, and is heralded by a lot of people on the planet today as the Son of God. But who considers him to be lucky? I mean, he was crucified, he was spat upon, and as the story goes, not treated all that well here. But he is heralded as one of the greatest human beings. So who am I to say if I'm luckier than Jesus or not? But it is a provocative line of thought to examine. And then his martyrdom. I mean, did he come here to commit suicide? If you have all the power in the world at your fingertips and you continue on a mission that will result in your death, well, that's the definition of martyrdom, huh? So, examining that, you would say Jesus was really about, because I don't really buy that. I think that he was really all about communicating a higher level of life that has really just faintly been portrayed and characterized universally or to the collective. I think a lot of people still look at that story as if, there's still this viewpoint of, Jesus was like came into this community like of cavemen that were very primal, and they were starting to get educated. They weren't even reading books. They didn't even write books. They didn't publish books at that time. And Jesus didn't write or publish anything. All he did was, the best we can tell, is that he walked through life and did some spectacular things that some people call miracles, healing people. He cared about people and demonstrated a sense of self-power that he credited with, gifts from God. And then they built up, an institutions around that. And we still deal with some of those institutions. And with the transparency that we have today, I think we're seeing more and more evidence of potentially the divinity within us and how our uniqueness and how our spiritual life can be nurtured and how we can use that in more of our everyday lives. So that's my perspective. And there's some other areas of interest that I noted. I'm really big on neuroscience because I think neuroscience is really waking us up to our bodies versus some of the myths and stories that we tell, and is beginning to help unfold the reality around us and how ultimately it does seem like we do create a lot of the realities and circumstances individually and collectively that we live out. And of course, I do a lot of talks on ancient wisdom, especially on my YouTube channel and stuff I've been sharing on TikTok and some other social media spots. The channel I call Transcendent, where it really started from addressing complex PTSD and some methods that I found helpful to help me survive dealing with trauma and to form a or rebuild a life more than once that was totally destroyed when I've lost everything. And so that's one of my the neuroscience combined with ancient wisdom has been a real lifesaver. And of course, as I started off earlier, and I'd fast and I have very intense physical exercise that I use to take care of myself physically, because I do believe that that's where everything on this earth does begin, is with a physical component. And I really do like to find how my body responds to different foods, the lack thereof, and the energy and perceptions that you have can be affected quite a bit by the state that you're in, as well as your physical environment. So I do a lot of work around that. And I've examined a number of different modalities: astrology, human design, the I Ching, all sorts of, you know, things that various mystics. Gurdjieff is a philosopher, Nietzsche, that I've worked with, and Steiner. Steiner really has been pretty interesting because he's a kind of an esoteric or a Christian looking for deeper meaning beyond the eye for an eye in the Bible, and looking, toward the deeper metaphors that much of the Bible may point to. I mean, it's fun to ask someone if they really believe that Moses parted the Red Sea. A lot of people don't even know about that story. Some people that do, you find, their answer is real quick about yes or no. And if they say yes, the question is, why do you believe that? Well, That's another um, lifetime study, possibly. But anyway, that's an area of interest that I've always had, and that leads into this set of existential questions about responsibility. I mean, do we choose our environments and circumstances? Are they predetermined, or are we here with a certain energetic need to fill that may take various circumstances? And it might not be, coming in, it might not be like, okay, well, Mark's going to be a great football player and he's going to do this, this, and this. It might be that he has a physical edge and he's going to have to learn some lessons around what to do with that physicality, or maybe it's rage. Well, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do about, you know, football. Nonetheless, someone could be, watching from a perspective inside of one of these bubbles and say, football is basically their religion. And, they worship football players and they, really look up to them. And so, in that sense, someone is praised and celebrated, and that's fine within that bubble. But at a spiritual level, or maybe at just a human level, a complete whole level, it's not about achieving something in life. It's more about satisfying an energetic, or a completing and becoming more whole as a human being. And it may involve dealing with sex or violence or domination or victimhood that needs to be resolved for whatever reason. I don't know, but the idea that we're responsible for our lives is an interesting topic to discuss with people, because sometimes people act like they're responsible for all the good things, and then all the failures were um, attributed to something outside of them. And we're always making up stories about how things happen, and this causal, cause and effect um, is at odds with more of a non-dualist outlook. And if you don't know anything about non-dualism, then you might check it out. It's interesting. So, are we responsible for the energy and the frequencies that fulfill our completion as human beings? Well, I think it takes a lot of work to really own them, and I think it's also scary to tell people that you have exactly what you want right now, because a lot of people feel like they're still getting up and going through a routine in search of something. In fact, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible is about, I think it's Hebrews 11, where it talks about Abraham, not getting what he wanted or what he felt like he wanted. And I think that's that story from the Bible 2,000 years ago just illustrates the perspective of people achieving something here in the material world, whereas they may have actually achieved exactly what they wanted energetically or spiritually. And the whole idea that it's all about being a football player and winning the Super Bowl, or whatever, pick whatever your trophy is, or your achievement, and whether you get it or not really means whether you had a good life or not. And I think that story from Hebrews really, as I'm speaking now, really resonates with the idea that, well, that's just a perspective, of lived out life. And we condition our kids to be achievers in many respects. and to put on identities and roles. And that's something about how the world works. But when we can learn to observe that and let that work on its own without identifying with it, then we do have a chance to achieve more of a spiritual transcendence and really work on being those values and the kind of person that, if you believe in the law, like this law of attraction, that the circumstances, will become quite different than maybe they were when you were in another more aspirational or dominant state of living your life. So, what bridges the connection between the material world and our physical bodies? I mean, have you ever met someone that was born into tremendous wealth, or was maybe like I've met a guy that was a billionaire that was adopted, and he achieved that wealth through that adopted family. And you look at him and how he was operating in his life, and you kind of wonder, well, it's kind of weird that this bag of skin and bones and organs has a number associated with it that was assigned by this inheritance that he had that we honor, that has a bank account that is huge and gives him all sorts of advantages, at least how we see them, advantages in life. And then when I talk to him and he's honest with me, you learn that that's a bubble. He's got all these other things that he can't deal with because he has everything. But what he really wants is to feel and be human, rather than having 20 Rolexes and 9 Land Rovers and multiple homes and on islands and I don't think I need to go on with that. But to feel and to be human, I think, is what really was the most prominent feature of a number of excessively wealthy people. But wealth is its own identity and its own bubble. And with it comes a whole set of obligations and responsibilities that most people, by default, will own or adopt. And sometimes I don't know if they realize that they have a choice. Well, so is there some agreement amongst humans that defines these connections? Yes. I think our collective really defines how things work and what we honor and our values. And because we do have this dominance built into our society, we have this 1% that seems to keep getting more and more and more. And then we have the masses that tend to, rationalize, keep things in their head and live in binaries. And the elite, as I've observed, enjoy watching the maybe not enjoy, but they maintain their position by a lot of people chasing false identities and fighting for this and versus that, when in the bigger picture, they're both very much the same. And that's part of what I'm trying to do here on Mark's Headroom is maybe talk about the bubble that you're in and gently pose examining some of the truths that you've adopted in your life, or identities or rules of operating, and compare those to maybe some other bubbles. And you find that those things may actually be simply rules, and they may serve you well in this. But to ascribe those sets of rules onto other human beings in other bubbles around the world, that may not be as wise as you or for the betterment of the collective of the earth and why we're all here. There may be some more benefits from harmonizing that across the bubbles with respect to what works in certain areas of the earth. So the social context and empathy, the final bullet section of my rambling here, examples of vastly different life circumstances, like the adopted kid who inherits billions versus the person born into poverty. There are people that, you go back and look at a number of artists that were working from trauma that created beautiful works of art. And a lot of that rage and fear fueled a lot of their self-expression and the path that they took in life that led to extraordinary results that were kind of maybe an example or help people touch places and without living those things themselves have aspect to that. Kind of rounded off or brought culture to some people that hadn't experienced that trauma directly themselves. So, question of taking responsibility for one's life at the soul level when 8 billion people are competing for survival in mental space, the luxury waste of contemplating philosophical questions like Mark's Headroom. Well, I've always written. I've been a writer since I was a kid, and I've journaled a lot and used a lot of my journals as places that I would write stories and actually write business plans and come up with a lot of creative ideas, even screenplays and movies that I've written, characters that I've examined, parts of myself that I've examined and sometimes identified with or sometimes rejected and said, I think that's someone else's projection upon me. But that's something that there's a man who is a professor at UT, at University of Texas here in Austin, that has quite a body of work on journaling. His name is Pennebaker. And the reason I bring this up is that journaling can be very helpful to get to the bottom of who you are and also to track these different um, roles and identities that you've assumed in your life and help you become a better observer if you ever look back on those things. But just the simple act of writing makes a witness out of yourself or part of yourself and gives you a little bit of distance from your life to see what's happening. And you can look back and just maybe see some changes or some different parts of yourself that you're honoring at one phase of your life versus others. And I think that's where some self awareness and observation has been a real gift in my life to me and to others because the more accepting that you can become, then you have the chance to really, there's something that it gives you an access to giving in a way that is impossible to give out of a position of dominance or of some pious view of helping someone who doesn't have what you have, but want you or you feel like they want what you have. So Pennebaker is a great place to look at journaling, and I think Um, the artist way was one of my early um, kind of guides around journaling. And will warn you, don't let other people read your journals. Keep them to yourself. And if you do find yourself channeling, parts of yourself and noticing that you're really angry here, but you're not identifying with it, but nonetheless you have those feelings, be very careful with that material, because if someone that's very naive, someone that's very almost like has a caveman mentality, and they see you write, I really feel like I want to do this to that person. Well, in this day and age with all these shooters around, you can imagine the kind of attention, the kind of bias that might be formed. Whether you plan to act on that or not, well, I guess that is up to you. But I've had a lot of those feelings over the years. I dealt with a lot of rage because I was sexually molested at 5. And I also watched my father be ostracized by a lot of the collective, the businesses and so forth, and asked to look the other way against a lot of injustice. So that's a complex area. But as far as your own personal development, the denial of those feelings, the denial of that rage, the denial of your the travesties that we all feel, not dealing with those things is perpetuating us carrying a lot of really negative stories forward that create behaviors that we don't even really understand. And I find it interesting where people are taking responsibility or trying to fight battles that they don't even really even know why they're fighting. So, um, are you taking complete responsibility for your life outcomes? Do you have enough empathy to understand how responsibility works for others, or are you trapped in your own limited perspective? So where are you at in this journey? Are we so caught up in a personal myopia that we only see our own programmed desires and goals? Well, I find myself putting myself out here and maybe rather vulnerable to people because, well, part of that vulnerability is telling your story and risking being misunderstood. And I think I do that. I do that a lot. And well, that's why I'm here. This is Mark's Headroom, signing off. See you at the end of my next 5-day fast. Wishing you all the best.